The storm came without mercy, sheets of rain slicing through the black Georgia night. Bianca Johnson gripped the steering wheel tighter, her headlights cutting through a curtain of water as thunder roared across the Atlanta skyline. She had finished another 12-hour shift at Grady Memorial, her body aching, her scrubs still smelling faintly of antiseptic and fatigue. Then she saw it, a car flipped over at the edge of the road, sparks flickering from a shattered headlight. No one else was there. The world was too wet, too dark, too late for help. She hesitated only for a second. Then the training and the compassion kicked in. Bianca threw open her door, rain drenching her within seconds. Her sneakers slipped in the mud as she stumbled toward the wreck. The windshield was cracked, the engine hissing like an animal in pain. "Sir, can you hear me?" she shouted, voice trembling against the thunder. A groan answered her. Through the fractured glass, she saw him, a man in his 40s, pale skin smeared with blood, his breathing shallow but steady. His shirt was torn open, revealing a deep gash along his ribs. Even in the chaos, there was something commanding about him, a quiet, dangerous composure, as if pain itself dared not touch him too long. Bianca yanked open the twisted door, with both hands rainwater rushing in. Her heart pounded. "You have to stay awake. What's your name?" The man's eyes flickered open, gray cold as steel, and yet there was a depth in them that startled her. His lips moved barely audible beneath the storm. "Don't be afraid," he murmured, voice low, rough. "I'm still alive." That voice, gravel and silk, it brushed against her spine like an electric current. She tore a strip of cloth from her sleeve, pressed it to his wound, her hands trembling. His blood mixed with the rain, dark and warm against her skin. Somewhere behind them, lightning cracked. For a second, his face lit up, strong jaw streaks of silver in his hair, a line of control etched between his brows. He caught her wrist, suddenly eyes locking with hers. "Why did you stop?" "Because you needed help. Most people drive away." There was a pause. Bianca swallowed the rain, filling the silence between them. "I'm not most people." He smiled faintly, just enough to make her heart stutter, and then his head tilted back. Sirens wailed in the distance. She kept pressure on his side until the paramedics pulled her away. When she looked back, the stranger's gaze was still fixed on her like a promise or a warning. By morning, he was gone. No hospital record, no patient by that name. Just a black business card, left in her coat pocket. Alexander King. King Global Holdings. Bianca frowned at the name. It sounded familiar, something she'd read in a magazine once maybe. But billionaires didn't end up half dead on wet highways. And if he truly was that Alexander King, the reclusive tech magnate whose wife had died in a plane crash 3 years ago. What the hell had he been doing alone in the rain? She tried to shrug it off, but something about those gray eyes haunted her. Something in the way he'd said, "Don't be afraid," like a man who'd spent years whispering that to himself. 3 months later. Bianca sat on a bus bound for New York, her duffel bag slung at her feet. A private medical agency had offered her a position, one that paid more than anything she'd ever earned. Private live-in nurse, confidential client, Manhattan. The instructions were oddly specific. No media, no visitors, no questions. Her best friend had laughed. "Girl, that sounds like a kidnapping job." Bianca had laughed too, though uneasily. Maybe I'm the one doing the rescuing this time. The mansion was a fortress of glass and silence. When she stepped inside, the air smelled faintly of cedar and rain. Every footstep echoed against marble. The housekeeper, an older woman named Marie, guided her upstairs to a private wing. "The patient doesn't like to be disturbed," Marie warned softly. "He doesn't take kindly to strangers." Bianca nodded, but her pulse quickened. She knocked once, then pushed open the door. He was sitting by the window, the afternoon light painting half his face in gold and half in shadow. His body was leaner now, wrapped in a gray shirt, his sleeves rolled to the elbows. A small scar crossed his temple, the only visible trace of that night. And those eyes, steel gray, watching her like a predator, studying the edge of its cage. Bianca froze. Her breath hitched. It was him. The man from the storm. The man she couldn't forget. Alexander King. He didn't look surprised. If anything, he looked prepared. "I was wondering how long it would take you to recognize me," he said calmly, his voice exactly as she remembered, low, deliberate, dangerous. Bianca blinked, forcing composure. "You never came back to the hospital." "I don't like hospitals." His lips curved faintly. "They remind me of promises I couldn't keep." He gestured toward the chair opposite him. "Sit. I'd like to ask you something." Bianca sat down slowly. The room felt heavy with something unsaid. He leaned forward, eyes never leaving hers. "Why did you stop that night?" She hesitated. "Because you were hurt." "That's not what I mean." His voice softened. "You didn't know who I was. You didn't ask for anything. You just ran into the storm." Bianca looked away, uncomfortable under his gaze. "I'm a nurse. It's what I do." He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "No, Miss Johnson. I've met enough people to know most only help when someone's watching." Her stomach tightened. There was something in the way he said her name, something that made her wonder how much he already knew about her. "You looked at me like I mattered," he murmured. "That's rare for a man who's spent his life owning everything but peace." The words hung between them. Bianca felt her heart thud hard against her ribs. She wanted to speak, to deny the strange pull between them, but then his expression shifted just slightly. The softness vanished. "From now on," he said, straightening, "you'll be my personal nurse. You'll manage my medication monitor, my vitals, and report directly to me. No one else." It wasn't a request. It was a command. Bianca's throat tightened. "Why me?" He looked at her for a long moment, as if weighing the truth. Then, with that same quiet intensity, from the night of the crash, he said, "Because I want to understand something." "Understand what?" "Why you risked your life for a man you didn't even know." For a second time, stilled. Bianca's pulse thundered in her ears. The rain outside had started again, tapping softly against the glass. It felt almost familiar, like the world was looping back to that night. She wanted to answer, to tell him that sometimes you help someone not because you're brave, but because you know what it feels like to be left bleeding on the side of the road. But she couldn't say it. Not yet. Instead, she met his gaze and said quietly, "Maybe I didn't do it for you." He tilted his head. "Then who was it for?" Her voice barely a whisper. "For the girl I used to be." Something flickered in his eyes, confusion, curiosity, maybe a hint of recognition. He leaned back, his tone softer now. "I don't believe in coincidences, Miss Johnson. People cross paths for a reason." Bianca forced a smile. "You sound like someone who's afraid that reason might hurt." "Maybe I am." He admitted, his jaw tightening. "But I still want to know it." Their eyes met, and in that silence, a quiet current began to hum something neither of them could name, but both could feel. A connection born from lightning, sealed by rain. Outside, thunder rolled again, distant but steady, and for the first time since that night, Alexander King didn't flinch. As Bianca walked out of his office, she caught her reflection in the mirrored hallway, drenched, trembling, alive. She didn't know that the man behind her had already searched her entire background. Didn't know that her name had appeared once before in a file buried deep in the archives of his late wife's foundation. And Alexander King didn't know that the woman who had saved his life had already been part of it long before the storm ever began. He was rich enough to buy the world, but not the peace inside his own mind. Morning in the King mansion felt like an imitation of life, too quiet, too perfect. The kind of silence that muffled everything, even the sound of breathing. Bianca stood in the kitchen doorway, watching the housekeeper place a tray of untouched breakfast on the counter. "He hasn't eaten again," Marie murmured. "He never does before noon. Sometimes not at all." Bianca nodded, already sensing the pattern, a man alive in body, but long dead in will. Alexander King was 40, and his name once meant brilliance. The man who built an empire out of algorithms, who made technology bend to his imagination. A visionary, the media used to call him, the Midas of Silicon Valley. But all the gold in the world couldn't stop a plane from falling out of the sky. 3 years ago, his wife, Dr. Nora King, humanitarian surgeon, beloved by the public, boarded a private jet to Kenya for a charity mission. The aircraft exploded mid-air. There were no survivors. Since then, Alexander had lived like a ghost, guarding his own mausoleum. He worked from home, spoke only in fragments, and spent hours staring out his window toward the Atlantic, as if waiting for the ocean to return what it had taken. The first week, Bianca tried to follow the medical routine, pills, diet charts, sleep schedule. But what struck her wasn't his condition, it was his absence. He ate because the body demanded it. He slept only with the help of medication. He existed, not lived. Some nights she'd find him walking barefoot through the halls at 2 a.m, shirt, untucked eyes unfocused. Once, she almost called out to him, but something about the way he moved, slow, deliberate, haunted, told her not to. He wasn't dangerous. He was just lost. On the 6th morning, Bianca placed a cup of coffee by his study desk. No one had asked her to. He didn't look up. The glow of his monitor reflected on his pale face, financial reports, emails, endless screens of numbers. "Black coffee," she said softly, "no sugar." "I noticed that's how you drink it," he replied without looking at her. "You notice too much." Bianca smiled faintly. "Comes with the job." Finally, his eyes lifted cold gray, assessing her like a variable in an equation. "Your job is to keep me alive, not to humanize me." "I didn't know they were separate things," she said, walking away before he could answer. That night, she heard the faint hum of music when passing his study again. Jazz, something smooth, nostalgic. He was sitting in the dark, staring at the rain against the window. She hesitated, then stepped in. "I didn't take you for a jazz man," she teased. He didn't smile. "It's the only thing that doesn't talk back. Sounds lonely. It's easier that way." Bianca leaned against the doorframe, studying his silhouette, broad shoulders, posture carved from self-control. Yet even from where she stood, she could see the exhaustion, not from lack of sleep, but from carrying grief that refused to die. So she said gently, "If you can still feel the music, maybe the world isn't over yet." For a moment, his expression flickered. "If you're still breathing, Mr. King," she added with a playful tilt of her lips, "it means you haven't lost." He looked up then, and something cracked open. The corner of his mouth curved almost unwillingly. A small, startled smile, the first in 3 years. It lasted barely a second, but Bianca felt it like the first ray of sunlight breaking through an unending storm. From that day, she started changing the rhythm of the house. The curtains opened earlier, the coffee brewed stronger. Jazz replaced the constant hum of silence. At first, Alexander said nothing, but she noticed how his steps became slower when passing the living room in the morning, how his gaze lingered on the cup of coffee left for him by the piano. Bianca never asked permission. She just acted because someone had to remind this house that it still had a heartbeat. One afternoon, she found him in the garden, the one no one dared touch since Nora's death. Weeds had overtaken the flower bed's vines, wrapped around the trellis like mourning ribbons. He stood there, motionless, hands buried in his pockets, staring at the wreck of roses. "Used to be her place," he said without turning. She believed everything could be fixed with sunlight and patience. Bianca stepped beside him. Sounds like she was right. Until the day she wasn't. He said it so quietly she almost missed it. Silence stretched heavy and raw. She could feel the air shift between them, grief and guilt woven into the same breath. "People die, Bianca," he said finally, voice hoarse. "But the noise they leave behind never stops." She looked at him, then really looked, at the tightness in his jaw, the shadows under his eyes, the trembling in his fingers that he tried to hide. "You keep feeding that noise," she whispered. "Maybe it's time to listen to something else." He didn't answer, but that night, the jazz was louder. She heard him pacing the halls, phone in hand, speaking to someone for the first time in months, his lawyer maybe, or his board. She didn't know. But the tone had changed, not entirely human yet, but alive. Bianca didn't realize she was smiling until Marie caught her and said quietly, "He hasn't spoken like that since Mrs. King died." Days passed, the house breathing again. Bianca found herself memorizing his habits, the way he read without blinking, the way his left hand always sought the cuff of his sleeve when anxious, the way his voice softened when he forgot he was supposed to be cold. But the closer she came, the more she felt a pull, not just sympathy, but recognition. There was something about his silence that mirrored her own. Late one night, while organizing medical files, she caught sight of her reflection in the window-eyed eyes, hair undone, the faint scar on her wrist she usually kept hidden. She had told no one how she got it. The accident. The night she almost didn't make it. Maybe that was why she couldn't walk away from him, because she saw in Alexander not a man beyond saving, but a man who didn't know how to be saved. The next morning, he surprised her. "Walk with me," he said. No preamble, no explanation. They ended up outside near the garden again. The winter air was sharp, but the sky was clean. A fragile blue stretched across the horizon. "Why did you really take this job?" he asked suddenly. Bianca hesitated. "Because it was offered. That's not an answer. Neither was your question." He almost smiled again, but his gaze turned distant. "People work for money or power or survival. You don't look like someone chasing any of those." "Maybe I'm chasing quiet," she said softly. He looked at her, then really looked, as if trying to read the hidden lines beneath her calm. Something in her eyes must have unnerved him, because he changed the subject abruptly. "Mrs. King used to say the same thing," he muttered. "She said peace was a choice." "Then maybe you keep choosing wrong." His head snapped toward her, surprised by the boldness. But she didn't flinch. "You punish yourself for surviving her." Bianca continued, her voice trembling but steady. "You think grief is loyalty. It's not. It's a cage you built, and you're too proud to admit it." For a long time, Alexander said nothing. Then, almost inaudibly, "What if that cage is all I have left of her?" Her chest tightened. She didn't have an answer for that. Later, when she brought him his evening pills, the tension lingered. He took them silently, eyes fixed on the city lights beyond the window. "You shouldn't talk to me like that," he said finally. "It's your fault," she replied. "You started asking the wrong questions." And for a fleeting moment, the corner of his lips twitched, a hint of warmth or surrender. She couldn't tell. That night, long after she'd gone to bed, Alexander stood by his window again, the city glowing beneath him. Bianca's words echoed in his mind, soft but relentless. "You think grief is loyalty. It's not. He'd spent years defining himself by loss, afraid to breathe too deeply, lest it erase her memory. But when that young woman walked into his world, bold, unafraid, alive, she disturbed something he thought had died. He wasn't sure if it was hope or danger, because loving again, he realized, might hurt worse than losing once. In the quiet of his study, Alexander opened an old photo frame, a picture of Nora smiling, with her hand over a stack of medical files. A slip of paper peeked out from behind the photo, yellowed with time. He pulled it free. On the corner, written in his late wife's handwriting, were 3 words: Bianca Johnson Fund. He froze. The rain began to fall again outside his window, soft, insistent, familiar. And for the first time in years, Alexander King felt fear. Not of death, but of what the truth might cost him. The snow had melted early that year, leaving the gardens behind the King estate in a hush of damp soil and forgotten colors. Bianca found herself drawn to the back path that morning, the one the staff never took, the one everyone avoided. Marie had warned her once in a whisper, "The door stays closed. Mr. King doesn't like anyone near it." But rules had never stopped Bianca from following curiosity, especially when something felt like a heartbeat trapped under glass. At the end of the path stood the greenhouse. Its windows were filmed with dust vines, crawling across the iron frame like veins of neglect. The door creaked when she touched it, a faint sigh escaping the exhale of years sealed shut. Inside, the air was stale with the scent of soil and ghosts. Rows of dead plants stretched before her brittle stems, gray leaves and one lonely clay pot in the center. A lavender plant, dried to its roots. Bianca crouched, fingers brushing the cracked soil. For reasons she couldn't explain, her throat tightened. Something about the stillness felt familiar, like standing at the edge of a memory she wasn't supposed to have. She found a watering can in the corner, half rusted, and filled it from the outdoor spigot. The water hissed as it hit the dry earth. "Just a little," she murmured. "You've earned another chance." 3 days later, the first green shoots appeared, tiny, stubborn, alive. Bianca smiled, surprised at how fiercely joy bloomed in her chest. She hadn't realized how much she'd missed this, watching something fight to live. Alexander noticed the scent before he saw the flowers. It hit him as he crossed the courtyard, faint lavender, ghost-like, impossible. He froze. The greenhouse door stood ajar. He hadn't opened it since Nora's funeral. The last time he'd walked through that threshold, her gardening gloves had still hung on the hook. A pulse of anger surged through him. When he stepped inside, the air felt different, lighter somehow, as if time had shifted. And there she was, Bianca. Kneeling by the lavender pot, her curls escaping their bunned sunlight, turning the dust around her into gold. She looked up when he entered, startled, then stood quickly. "I was just... You had no right to be here," he snapped. His voice came sharper than intended, slicing through the fragile calm. "This place is off limits." Her eyes narrowed slightly, but her tone stayed even. "I didn't know grief had property lines." He stepped closer. "This was my wife's. Everything here is hers." Bianca met his gaze not with defiance, but with something gentler, sadder. Then maybe she wouldn't want it to die. The words landed like a stone in still water. Alexander's chest tightened. "You don't understand." "No," Bianca said softly, turning toward the tiny lavender sprout. "I do. I just think no one can live by holding on to dead flowers." And then she walked past him, the scent of lavender trailing after her like forgiveness. He stood there long after she was gone, every breath scraping against memory. That night, Alexander couldn't sleep. The house was quiet again, but not peacefully so. He found himself pacing, drawn toward the glass door that led to the garden. When he finally stepped into the night, the moon was high, silver light, spilling over the greenhouse like spilled milk. He pushed open the door. The air inside had changed completely, moist, fragrant, alive. The lavender glowed faintly in the moonlight, each small bud trembling in the breeze. For a moment, the image blurred the color, the scent, the warmth, and he saw Nora. She was standing where Bianca had knelt earlier, her hair tucked back, her hands, dirty with soil, humming softly as she worked. Then, as if the vision were too fragile to bear, her outlines shimmered, shifting, blending, and it wasn't Nora anymore. It was Bianca, young, alive, fierce in her gentleness. Alexander's breath caught. For years he had imagined that if Nora ever returned, she'd look at him with love. But now, looking at Bianca's reflection in the moonlit glass, he realized something devastating. He didn't want the dead to come back. He wanted the living to stay. The next morning, Bianca found him standing by the greenhouse door. He didn't say anything, just gestured for her to follow him inside. They walked between the rows of flowers, some blooming again, others still brittle but promising. He stopped at the lavender pot. "It's growing," he said quietly. Bianca smiled. "Of course it is. It just needed light." He turned to her, the question slipping out before he could stop it. "Do you believe people are the same?" She hesitated, then nodded. "Maybe they just need permission to live again." Alexander's gaze dropped to her hands, still stained with soil. Something in his chest shifted, a slow, painful thaw. Over the next few days, the greenhouse became her sanctuary. She'd sneak there between shifts, pruning leaves, humming softly as she worked. Sometimes she'd catch Alexander watching from the distance, his expression unreadable, half curiosity, half fear. Once, she found a new watering can, placed neatly by the door. Another time, fresh gloves his late wife's size replaced with hers. No note, no words. But she understood. He was letting the ghosts breathe. Late one evening, she discovered him inside again, sleeves rolled up, trimming the withered stems beside her. "I thought this place was forbidden," she teased. He didn't look up. "Consider it pardoned." Bianca smiled. "That's progress." He paused, fingers brushing against a petal. "Don't mistake motion for progress, Miss Johnson. Sometimes it's just pacing in circles." "You're here," she said simply. "That's not a circle. That's a start." Her voice was quiet but unwavering. It startled him how much he needed to believe her. Later, as they worked side by side, the silence between them softened. Bianca asked, "Did she love it here?" "She did," Alexander said. "She said planting something was like praying with your hands." "She sounds beautiful." "She was," he admitted. Then, after a pause, "So are you in a very inconvenient way." Bianca froze, unsure if she'd heard him right. But when she looked at him, his eyes had already drifted back to the flowers, guarded again like a door closed just after a confession slipped through. That night, Alexander sat alone in the greenhouse after she left. The lavender had fully bloomed now, violet and defiant. He traced a finger along one of the petals, exhaling slowly. For years, he'd hated this place for what it reminded him of. Now, for the first time, it reminded him of something else, the quiet miracle of returning. The air felt lighter, not healed, but open. And for a man who'd lived in silence, openness felt terrifying. He leaned back, eyes drifting to the moonlight on the glass ceiling. Nora's voice echoed faintly in memory. "When something grows again, don't question it. Just let it." He closed his eyes, and for a fleeting moment, he let himself believe it was okay to start over. The next morning, he returned to his study. An envelope waited on his desk. No name, no sender. Inside was a printed article draft, unsigned, marked with red ink. King Global accused of ties to exploitative labor in West Africa. His pulse spiked. The headline burned. He looked toward the window, the scent of lavender still clinging to his hands. Outside, Bianca was in the garden laughing softly as she wiped soil from her cheeks. And Alexander King realized that the past he'd just begun to forgive was about to rise again. The morning broke too still, the kind of stillness that comes before something shatters. Bianca arrived at the mansion early, her hands carrying the faint scent of lavender from the greenhouse. She had been humming to herself, a habit she'd picked up to fill the silences he left behind. But as soon as she stepped into the main hall, she felt it a tension thick as fog. Marie handed her a folded newspaper, her expression pale. "You might want to see this before he does," she whispered. Bianca unfolded it slowly. The headline hit like a slap across the face. Anonymous whistleblower exposes King Global and Nora King Foundation for funding child labor mines in West Africa. Her stomach dropped. Beneath the title were photographs children covered in dust, bare feet in red mud, their faces blurred. And beside the images, the logo of King Global Holdings. Her pulse quickened. This wasn't just a business scandal. It was betrayal, dressed in charity. By the time she reached his study, Alexander was already there, sleeves rolled, eyes red, a half-empty glass of scotch on the table. "You've seen it," he said flatly. "Yes." Her voice shook despite her effort to stay calm. "Is it true?" He didn't answer. Just looked out the window, jaw clenched, the muscles in his temple twitching. Bianca stepped forward, fury rising. "You built a company on saving people," and yet she slammed the newspaper down on his desk. "This is what your name stands for." Alexander's tone remained icy. "Don't believe everything you read." "Then tell me it's a lie," she demanded. He hesitated just long enough for her to see the truth flicker in his eyes. Bianca's voice dropped quiet, but sharp. "You knew." He exhaled shakily. It wasn't supposed to happen like that. "What wasn't the foundation's expansion?" he said. "After Nora died, some projects went unchecked. The board made decisions without my consent. I let it happen," she cut in. For 3 years, his eyes met hers, raw and unguarded, for the first time. "I couldn't destroy what she built, Bianca." That foundation was her legacy. Bianca stared at him, disbelief giving way to heartbreak. "Her legacy," she repeated. "Do you even hear yourself? You're protecting a dead woman's reputation while children are dying for your profits." Alexander's voice cracked. "You don't understand. I owe her everything. I was nothing before Nora. She gave my life purpose." Bianca's reply came like a blade wrapped in sorrow. "Then you owe yourself a chance to do something right." The silence that followed was heavier than shouting. He looked at her, really looked, and in that moment, she saw a man split in two. One half chained to guilt, the other begging to be free of it. But he didn't speak, and that silence told her everything. Bianca turned away, blinking back the sting in her eyes. "You once said people cross paths for a reason," she whispered. "Maybe I was sent here to remind you that money isn't redemption." "Bianca," she stopped at the door, her hand trembling against the frame. "You can't heal others with hands still covered in ash." Then she walked out, not running, not crying, just leaving. Because sometimes walking away is the only way to make someone see the distance they've created. For a long time after Alexander stayed frozen at his desk, the newspaper spread open before him. The words blurred, the images burned. He remembered Nora's voice, the way she used to say, Our wealth is a responsibility, not a crown. And yet he had worn it like armor. Outside rain began to fall soft and relentless. He rose and wandered through the halls until he found himself at the glass doors of the greenhouse. The air was cool, the scent of lavender faint, but still there, alive even in the storm. He stepped inside his shoes, sinking into damp soil. The flowers had bloomed, full, vivid, defiant. But there was no laughter, no humming, no gentle hands tending them. Only the echo of what she'd left behind. For the first time in years, Alexander felt the house breathing against him, not as a shelter, but as an accusation. He touched one of the lavender stalks. The petals trembled under his fingers. "You were right," he whispered into the silence. "Nothing lives when you hold on to the dead." That night, he couldn't escape the images. The children's faces, Nora's name, Bianca's voice. Every truth he had buried was clawing its way to the surface. He poured himself another drink, then another, until the world blurred into gray. But even then, he couldn't drown her words. You can't heal others with hands still covered in ash. By dawn, he made a decision. He called his legal team. "Find out who leaked it," he said, "and get me the full audit, every cent the foundation ever spent." "Sir," his lawyer hesitated. "If we dig that deep, it could destroy everything." Alexander closed his eyes. Maybe that's the point. Days passed. Bianca didn't return. The greenhouse grew wild again, the flowers overblooming without care. The house felt emptier than ever, as if her absence had carved a new kind of silence into its walls. Marie asked if she should call her back. Alexander shook his head. If she wanted to be here, she would. He didn't tell her that he checked the guest wing every night anyway, half hoping to find a suitcase or a forgotten sweater, half praying for a sign she hadn't really gone. But hope, he'd learned, was the cruelest illusion of all. One evening, a message arrived from his accountant. The audit was done. He opened the file on his laptop, and his heart dropped again. The foundation had indeed been funneling money into offshore subsidiaries, tied to mining contracts in Sierra Leone, projects Nora herself had approved in her final year. Alexander stared at the numbers, numb. He had built his empire on code and logic, but this was human rot, dressed as virtue. He wanted to believe Nora hadn't known, but a part of him, the part that had worshipped her as flawless, began to crack. What if he whispered to the empty room, "The person I loved wasn't who I thought she was"? Outside, thunder rolled the same rhythm that had started it all months ago. The storm that brought Bianca into his life. He walked back to the greenhouse once more, unable to stop himself. The door groaned open under his hand. Raindrops tapped against the glass roof, washing the dust away. Through the blur, he could almost see her again, not Nora, not Bianca, but the ghost of everything he had lost and everything he might still find. He sat among the flowers, water dripping from his hair, his chest heavy with something unnameable. For years he had believed grief was loyalty, that to move on was to betray. But now, sitting alone in the place that smelled like her touch, he finally understood what Bianca had meant. Maybe redemption wasn't in holding on. Maybe it was in letting go. He closed his eyes. "I'm sorry," he whispered to Nora, to Bianca, to himself. When he opened them again, the first light of dawn had crept across the glass painting, the lavender and silver. It was beautiful, and it hurt like hell. Later that morning, as he prepared to leave for the city, his assistant handed him a sealed envelope that had arrived overnight. No return address, only his name typed neatly on the front. Inside was a single photograph, a hospital record from 20 years ago, stamped with the seal of the Nora King Foundation. At the bottom, a child's name, Bianca Johnson. Alexander's pulse stopped. He stared at it for a long time, the world narrowing to that single name and the realization that their connection ran far deeper than chance. The letter came quietly left on his desk, between stacks of reports and unopened envelopes. No name on the front, but he knew the handwriting firm, yet gentle, each letter traced with control that barely hid emotion. Bianca's handwriting. Alexander stood there for a long time before opening it. His hands were steady, but his heartbeat wasn't. The note was short. No anger, no accusations. Just the truth, written in her careful script. You don't need to be saved, Alexander. You just need to learn how to believe again. And until you do, there's nothing I can give you that will matter. She hadn't said goodbye, and somehow that made it worse. The mansion felt cavernous without her. Her laughter no longer echoed down the hallways. Her music no longer spilled from the greenhouse in the mornings. Even the air seemed colder, as if the house itself were mourning her absence. Marie asked where Miss Johnson had gone. Alexander only said, "She resigned," and left it at that. But every word felt like glass in his throat. He stopped going to the greenhouse. Couldn't bear the sight of it. The lavender had started to wilt again, neglected reaching for a light that wasn't there. So he buried himself in work. It was easier to drown in numbers than in memories. Days blurred. Meetings, calls, deadlines. A mechanical rhythm that left no room for thought. But late at night, when the house fell silent, Bianca's voice would return that mix of defiance and compassion that had cracked something inside him. You can't heal others with hands still covered in ash. He had spent years believing grief was loyalty. That silence honored the dead. But now that same silence had taken her too. The media storm around the foundation scandal had cooled, replaced by new headlines and newer tragedies. Yet, the fallout lingered. Investors left. Donors withdrew. King Global's name carried the weight of suspicion. He could fix that, of course. Buy back reputation. Rebuild trust. He was good at fixing things. Except the one thing that mattered. One evening, he walked into his office and found the old photograph again, the hospital record from the Nora King Foundation files. The one with her name. Bianca Johnson. He traced the faded letters with his thumb. The date, 20 years ago. The record, a heart surgery fully funded by the foundation. So it was true. She had been part of Nora's legacy long before she ever walked into his life. He should have felt comfort. Instead, he felt haunted. Because it meant the woman he was beginning to love was, in a way, another piece of the wife he could never let go. That night, he poured himself a drink and sat by the fire, staring at the flames. Maybe that's why she found me, he whispered into the quiet. Maybe this was all some cruel symmetry. Nora saved her life, and she came back to return the favor. He laughed under his breath, bitter and low. And I still managed to ruin it. The glass slipped from his hand, shattering on the floor. He didn't bother to pick it up. When Marie entered the next morning, she found him asleep on the couch, suit still on, hair disheveled, a faint trail of ash on the carpet. "Sir," she said softly, "the press is asking if you'll make a statement about the foundation's restructuring." Alexander rubbed his temples. "Tell them, not yet." Marie hesitated. "And the greenhouse. The gardener says the flowers are dying." He looked toward the window. The sun was rising pale and thin, struggling through clouds. "Then let them," he said quietly, but he couldn't stay away forever. 3 nights later, something pulled him outside again. A restlessness, a whisper he couldn't name. The path to the greenhouse was overgrown now, vines curling over the stone. When he opened the door, the scent hit him, faint lavender mixed with dust and decay. Bianca's gloves still hung by the table, streaked with dried soil. Her watering can sat half full, as if she'd meant to return. He knelt by the lavender pot and ran his fingers over the wilted stems. "You needed light," he murmured, "and I left you in the dark." The metaphor wasn't lost on him. He stayed there for hours, listening to the rain tap against the glass roof. When he finally spoke, his voice cracked open, like the first wound he'd ever admitted to. "I love you, Bianca," he said, into the emptiness. "But I didn't know how to choose you." His throat tightened. "I was too afraid of betraying her, of losing you the same way." The rain answered for her, soft, endless. In the days that followed, he began to change small things, almost without realizing it. The photographs of Nora came down from the walls not out of anger, but because he could no longer bear the weight of what they represented. He boxed them carefully one by one and placed them in the attic. The silence in the house felt different now, less like punishment, more like space waiting to be filled. He started waking earlier, drinking less, walking the halls at dawn. The staff whispered that he seemed different, lighter even. But he didn't feel lighter. He felt raw. Healing, he discovered, wasn't the same as peace. It was pain with purpose. One afternoon, he received an email from a journalist. He recognized the same anonymous contact who had leaked the story months ago. "You don't know me," it read, "but I thought you should see this." Attached was a photo taken in Sierra Leone. A young woman standing before a small clinic, painted white and blue. Her name on the sign above Bianca Health Outreach Center. For a long moment, Alexander couldn't breathe. She hadn't left to escape him. She had left to continue what he'd refused to finish. The realization hit like sunlight breaking through cloud. That evening, he stood once more in the greenhouse. The sun was setting and the sky outside burned gold. The flowers were mostly gone now, dried, curling inward. But when he opened the window, a warm gust of wind carried the faintest scent of lavender through the air. He closed his eyes and let it wash over him. "You were right," he whispered. "Maybe I don't need saving, but I think I finally believe." For the first time, the words didn't feel like surrender. They felt like beginning. He turned to leave, but paused at the doorway. On the ground near the pot, something caught his eye. A small folded paper pressed under a broken clay shard. He picked it up. The edges were damp, but the handwriting was unmistakable. Bianca's. "For when you're ready to see the truth, look deeper. In her files." His heart raced. Her files, Nora's. The archived documents he'd avoided for years. He went back inside, pulse-quickening rain, starting again beyond the glass. That night, Alexander opened the old hard drive from Nora's office, the one he hadn't touched since she died. Buried in encrypted folders, he found a file labeled Project Eden, restricted. Inside, photographs, donation receipts, and a single scanned ID. A girl maybe 9 years old, eyes wide and bright. Her name printed at the bottom, Bianca Johnson. And beneath it, a note in Nora's handwriting. "One life saved. Maybe one day she'll save another." Alexander stared at the screen, breath trembling. Outside, lightning flashed, and he finally understood that the woman he'd lost was the only bridge left between his past and redemption. The cursor blinked on the screen like a heartbeat. Alexander stared at the file name, Project Eden, restricted for what felt like an eternity before opening it. The folder expanded into hundreds of documents, reports, scans, receipts, donor lists, and then buried among them, one small PDF. Beneficiary number 173, Bianca Johnson, age 9. He clicked. A photograph appeared. A thin, brown-skinned girl in a hospital gown, her eyes wide and solemn. A small scar peeked from beneath her collarbone. The same eyes that had once looked at him across a dinner table, soft and alive. Underneath the note, in Nora's handwriting, heart surgery. Sponsored in full. She'll live. I can feel it. This one has fight in her. Alexander's hand trembled on the mouse. The world seemed to tilt. Bianca was one of Nora's children. One of the lives Nora had saved through the foundation, the same foundation he had nearly destroyed. He leaned back in the chair, breath shallow. Memories collided in fragments, Bianca laughing in the kitchen, her hand brushing the petals in the greenhouse, her anger when she accused him of blindness. Now, every look, every word carried a new meaning. He whispered her name, and it felt different, sacred, fragile. The kind of name destiny writes in the margins, before the story even begins. He scrolled through the rest of the report. Surgery performed in Atlanta General Hospital. Date, April 16, 2008. Doctor's signature, unreadable. Post-operative note, strong recovery. Discharged to care of foster aunt Isabel Brown. That name hit him again, Bianca's aunt. The one she'd mentioned in passing, the one who had raised her. It was all connected. Everything he had believed was random. The night she stopped to save him, the way she fit into his house as if she'd always belonged, was now tied together by an invisible thread woven years before they met. Alexander closed his eyes. For years he had seen his life as a series of accidents, losses, and coincidences strung together by grief. But this was design. He stood abruptly, pacing the room. The floorboards creaked beneath his steps. You planned this, didn't you, Nora? He murmured into the silence. You couldn't save me while you were here, so you sent her. It wasn't anger. It was awe, the kind that feels like heartbreak wearing light. Hours passed. When he finally emerged from the study, dawn had broken, pale sunlight spilling through the windows. He walked down the hallway slowly, his reflection following him in the glass. The house felt different, not empty, but waiting. Every portrait of Nora seemed to watch him with a softer gaze, as if forgiving him for taking so long to understand. He found himself standing before the greenhouse once more. The door was slightly ajar, the air inside carrying that faint ghost of lavender. He stepped in. The plants had nearly died, yet the smallest one, the lavender Bianca had revived months ago, was somehow still alive, a few purple buds trembling at its stem. He crouched, fingers brushing the soil. You're just like her, he whispered. You refuse to die. The sunlight shifted through the glass, painting his face in gold. For a long time, he just stayed there, not thinking, not planning, simply feeling. All the guilt, the fear, the silence, they didn't vanish. But for the first time, they stopped defining him. He had been so obsessed with what was gone that he hadn't seen what had been given back. In the afternoon, he returned to his office. He reread the file again, slower this time, tracing Nora's note at the bottom. One life saved. Maybe one day she'll save another. It wasn't just a record. It was a message, a prophecy he hadn't known he was living inside. And she had been right. Bianca had saved him not from death, but from a life that had stopped meaning anything. He smiled, small and weary. You always saw further than I did. He opened a new document on his computer. For the first time in months, his hands moved with purpose. Title King, Global Renewal Initiative. Subtitle, Returning What Was Taken, Rebuilding What Was Lost. He would reopen the foundation, but differently this time. Transparent, accountable, real. No hiding behind Nora's legacy. No illusions of charity masking profit. He typed for hours, outlining new programs, health education. Sustainable work for the same children. They had failed. By sunset, he sat back and looked at the plan. It wasn't perfect, but it was honest. And maybe he thought that was enough to start believing again. That evening, he took a walk outside the estate. The air smelled like rain and memory. In the distance, thunder rolled, a soft echo of the night she had found him. He thought of her hands shaking as she held his bleeding body, of how, without knowing it, she had completed a circle that began long before either of them understood. A single act of mercy had brought them together once, through Nora's kindness, once, through Bianca's courage. He smiled faintly. Maybe fate isn't cruel after all. Inside the greenhouse, the moonlight filtered through the leaves. Alexander stood among the flowers, whispering into the quiet. "You didn't lose me, Nora. You just sent someone to finish what you started." He looked up at the stars beyond the glass ceiling, the air cool against his skin. And I think she did. The faint sound of a breeze brushed through, lifting the petals. For a fleeting second, he could almost swear he heard Nora's laugh, low, light, forgiving. He turned to leave, and that was when he saw it. Tucked beside the lavender pot, half buried in soil, was another envelope. Old yellowed edges crinkled. He picked it up carefully. The handwriting was Nora's. The seal read, "To be opened when the flowers bloom again." His chest tightened. Hands trembling, he peeled it open. Inside, a single page. "If you're reading this, it means you've finally looked where I hoped you would. Alexander. I've always believed love doesn't end, it changes form. When you meet the one who reminds you to breathe, don't run. That's me telling you it's safe." He exhaled, tears stinging his eyes. The next morning, he called his assistant. "Book me a flight," he said. "To where, sir?" He looked out the window. In his hand, the printed photo of Bianca beside her clinic in Sierra Leone. "To the place where she's healing others," he said softly. "It's time I tried to do the same." He hung up, turned back to the lavender still clinging to life, and whispered, not to the past, but to what came next. "Wait for me, Bianca. I finally understand what I was meant to find." The plane touched down in Sierra Leone just before dusk. The light outside the window was a muted gold, not the blinding brilliance of wealth, but the kind of light that made everything look human again. Alexander sat still as the cabin emptied. His reflection in the window looked older, not tired, but quieter. The kind of quiet that came after breaking and being rebuilt. He wasn't here as the billionaire Alexander King, CEO of King Global Holdings. He was just a man searching for the woman who had shown him what it meant to live again. The drive from the airport took 3 hours along cracked red dirt roads. The air was thick with dust and heat. The villages he passed weren't on any of his maps yet. They were filled with movement, children laughing, women carrying baskets on their heads, the pulse of real life beating in every corner. When the car finally stopped, he stepped out and looked up at a small white building at the end of the hill. The sign above the entrance read, Bianca Health Outreach Center. The letters were hand-painted imperfect, but they shone like something sacred. Alexander felt a strange tightness in his chest. Pride, guilt, awe, all tangled together. He took a deep breath and walked forward. The air inside was warm and smelled faintly of soap, herbs, and earth. Children's voices echoed down the hallway. He followed the sound until he reached a small open room. Bianca was there, sitting on the floor with a group of girls, a circle of notebooks and crayons scattered around them. Her hair was tied back, her dress simple, her laughter effortless. And remember, she was saying softly, tracing a heart on a little girl's wrist. Your skin is not darkness. It's a mirror that reflects light. Never let anyone tell you otherwise. The girls giggled, touching their own faces, whispering the words to one another like a prayer. He stood in the doorway, frozen, afraid to breathe, afraid to break the spell. She looked radiant, not in the way magazines captured beauty, but in the way faith looked when it finally had a face. For a long moment, Alexander just watched. The woman who had saved him without meaning to, who had turned his grief into something that could bloom again. And for the first time in his life, he didn't feel like a man arriving with answers. He felt like someone arriving to listen. When the class ended, Bianca gathered the crayons into a tin and handed out candies. The children waved and ran outside, their laughter fading into the sunlit air. Only then did she turn toward the door. Her breath caught. He was there. Not in a tailored suit, not surrounded by bodyguards, not hiding behind control. Just Alexander in a wrinkled shirt dust on his shoes, eyes clear and honest. She didn't speak. Neither did he. For a long heartbeat, they just looked at each other, two lives that had circled the same pain and somehow found their way back to the same light. Finally, she broke the silence. "You shouldn't have come. I know," he said, "but I needed to." Bianca crossed her arms, trying to keep her composure. Why now, Alexander? What could you possibly say that wasn't said already? He stepped closer, his voice low but steady. "Nothing that would erase what I did, nothing that would change what you built. I just came to say thank you." Her brow furrowed. "For what? For teaching me how to live again," he said simply. Bianca's throat tightened. There was no grand apology, no promises wrapped in eloquence, just truth. And that made it harder to hold her walls. They sat outside on the steps as the sun began to set. The horizon burned orange and violet, the air thick with the hum of crickets. For a long while, neither spoke. Finally, she said quietly, "I thought I hated you. You had every reason to. I told myself you were just another man who used power to hide from pain." He smiled faintly. "You weren't wrong." She looked at him, then really looked and saw it. The change, the way his shoulders no longer carried the arrogance of invincibility, but the humility of someone who had finally learned to kneel. "What did you find in those files?" she asked, almost afraid to know. He hesitated. "The truth." Her eyes narrowed. "About me?" He nodded. "You were one of Nora's children, beneficiary number 1773. Bianca froze. The words sank like stones into her chest. "She saved you," he continued, "and somehow you saved me." Her gaze dropped to her hands, trembling in her lap. "I didn't know. I think you weren't meant to," he said gently. "Until now." Silence stretched between them again, heavy, but not empty. The kind of silence that held both grief and grace. Finally, Bianca whispered, "I used to wonder why I stopped that night, why I pulled over in the rain when everyone else kept driving. Now I think I know." He turned to her. She smiled, faintly, tears in her eyes. "It wasn't random. I think I was coming home, just not the kind with walls." Alexander's breath caught. He reached for her hand, then stopped halfway. Bianca didn't pull away. Their fingers met, tentative, trembling, the space between them, closing like the slow exhale of forgiveness. As night fell, the stars blinked awake one by one. The world around them grew quiet, except for the soft hum of the generator and the distant laughter of children. Alexander broke the silence first. "When I lost Nora, I thought that was the end of everything good in me. I built walls so high that even light couldn't get through. But then you walked in, and you didn't knock. You just opened every door I'd locked." Bianca smiled faintly. "Maybe because I know what locked doors feel like." He turned to her, then his voice trembling. "I don't want to be your redemption, Bianca. I just want to walk beside you, if you'll let me." For a long moment, she said nothing. The night breeze lifted her curls, and the scent of jasmine filled the air. She looked at him, the man who once embodied everything she despised: privilege, distance, control. Now, stripped of it all, he was just human. And maybe that was what she'd been waiting for. Not perfection, not promises, just truth. "In my village," she said softly, "we have a saying, the one who kneels to the earth hears God faster." He smiled through tears. "Then maybe I'm finally listening." They sat there until the moon climbed high, talking about the past, not as a wound, but as a map. He told her about reopening the foundation this time, in full transparency. She told him about her dream of building a girls' school next to the clinic. And somewhere in the quiet between those words, something unspoken settled. Not reconciliation, not romance, but recognition. They had both been broken by loss. Now, for the first time, they were building something from it. When she stood to leave, he rose too. The air shimmered with the echo of what neither dared to say. Bianca looked at him one last time, her eyes softer now. "In my heart," she said, "you'll never be the man who fell. You'll be the man who stood up." He nodded, voice barely a whisper. "And in mine, you'll always be the reason I could." She smiled, turned and walked toward the clinic. Alexander watched her go, the light from the doorway framing her like a promise made in another lifetime. Later that night, as Alexander sat alone outside the clinic, a nurse handed him a small notebook Bianca had left behind. Inside the cover, written in her handwriting, were 6 words: "Love is only real when shared." Beneath it, a note: "Tomorrow, the opening of the new school. You should see what hope looks like when it has a roof." Alexander smiled through a blur of tears. For the first time in years, he felt ready for tomorrow. The rain came softly that morning, like a memory returning without pain. Outside the glass hall of the new community center in downtown Chicago, the sky shimmered silver, and rows of umbrellas lined the entrance. It had been exactly 1 year since the day Alexander King walked into Bianca Johnson's clinic. 1 year since the world stopped being just about loss and began to breathe again. Now the banner above the stage read, "The King Johnson Foundation for Girls of Color, where every dream has a place to begin." The hall was filled with people: journalists, donors, former students, mothers with their daughters, dressed in bright cotton dresses. But the only person Alexander saw when he stepped backstage was her, Bianca. She stood by the window wearing a white dress the color of dawn. Her curls framed her face, her expression calm, radiant, almost otherworldly. When she turned, their eyes met, and for a moment the noise of the world vanished. He smiled softly. "You still hate crowds." She laughed under her breath. "You still find a way to put me in front of one." "Occupational hazard," he said, adjusting his tie, though it was clear his hands were trembling. Bianca noticed, and something in her chest ached. This man, once so untouchable, now stood before her, stripped of armor, every gesture carrying the quiet grace of humility. "You don't have to do this," she said. "The foundation is already yours as much as mine." He looked at her, really looked. That's not what this is about. When the announcer called his name, Alexander stepped onto the stage to thunderous applause. Cameras flashed. The room glowed under the soft rainlight filtering through the glass ceiling. He stood at the podium for a moment silent. Then, instead of reading from the notes on the stand, he reached into his jacket and unfolded a handwritten sheet of paper. The crowd quieted. Bianca froze where she stood at the side of the stage. He read aloud, voice trembling just enough to make it real. Term lifetime. Value priceless. Title Mrs. King. A murmur rippled through the audience laughter, surprise then a wave of emotion that needed no translation. Alexander looked toward Bianca, eyes glistening. "I once believed I had lost everything worth keeping," he said. "But then a woman walked into my life and taught me something I should have known all along, that light doesn't come to erase the darkness. It comes to remind us to walk through it." The room fell utterly still. "This foundation," he continued, "is not about money or legacy or redemption. It's about gratitude. For every girl who was told she wasn't enough, this is for her. For every child who was saved by Nora and every life that was saved by Bianca, this is for them." His voice softened. "And for the woman who reminded me that love isn't about rescue, but about courage." He turned toward her, a quiet smile trembling on his lips. "Bianca Johnson, I can't promise perfection. I can only promise a lifetime of learning how to love you better." Bianca pressed a trembling hand to her mouth. The audience blurred. The lights shimmered like water. When she finally walked toward him, the sound of applause swelled around them, thunderous, unstoppable. Alexander's breath caught as she reached the podium. Tears traced her cheeks, but her voice when she spoke was steady. "You once asked me why I stopped for a stranger in the rain," she said softly. "Now I think I know. It wasn't fate, it was purpose." She smiled through tears. "Because some hearts are meant to collide, not to break, but to rebuild each other." The crowd rose to its feet. Alexander took her hand, not as a man claiming victory, but as one surrendering to grace. And when their fingers intertwined, it felt less like a proposal and more like a prayer finally answered. The applause rolled through the hall like a storm. Children clapped, cameras flashed, someone shouted, "Kiss her already," and laughter rippled through the crowd. Bianca shook her head, laughing through tears. Alexander leaned in, not rushed, not grand, just enough for the world to witness something real. When their lips met, it wasn't a fairy tale ending. It was something quieter, deeper, the kind of love that had already survived the worst and learned how to bloom anyway. Outside, the rain grew heavier, but no one ran for shelter. The people stayed watching through the glass walls as Alexander and Bianca walked down the aisle together, not as billionaire and nurse, not as savior and survivor, but as two souls who had finally found their way home. Children pressed their hands against the windows, faces glowing. A group of girls chanted softly, "We can, we can, we can." And inside, Bianca whispered to him, "You see them. That's the real legacy." He nodded, voice breaking. "You built this." She looked up at him. "No, we did." Hours later, when the guests had gone and the lights dimmed, Alexander stood by the glass wall, watching the rain streak down the panes. Bianca joined him barefoot now, holding 2 cups of coffee. She handed him one. "It's funny," she said. "The night we met, I thought that rain would drown us both." He smiled. "Looks like it just washed everything clean." They stood in silence for a moment, the sound of rain filling the space between words. Then he turned to her, brushing a strand of hair from her cheek. "You know this is the only contract I'll never want to renegotiate." Bianca laughed, the kind of laugh that could heal years. "Good," she whispered, "because I already signed it." As the last guests departed, a young girl, maybe 12, lingered by the doorway. She clutched a small folder to her chest. Bianca noticed her and smiled. "Hey there, what's your name? Amara?" the girl said shyly. I want to be a doctor someday, like the lady in the picture." She pointed to the portrait hanging at the entrance, Nora King smiling in her white coat. Bianca's eyes softened. "Then you will be, and maybe one day someone will point to your picture and say the same." Amara's smile widened. "You really think so?" Alexander knelt beside her. We don't just think so. We believe it. The girl's face lit up, and for a fleeting second, it felt as though the past, present, and future had all joined hands. As the hall emptied, Bianca turned to Alexander. Do you think Nora's watching? She asked quietly. He looked up at the ceiling, the rainlight glinting in his eyes. I think she's smiling, he said, because the light she left behind didn't fade. It just changed hands. Bianca leaned her head against his shoulder. Outside, thunder rumbled softly, not a warning, but a benediction. And in that moment, under the same kind of rain that had once brought them together, Alexander and Bianca stood surrounded by the sound of life, laughter, thunder, hope. No longer two people trying to survive the past, but two souls brave enough to claim the future. The camera pans upward, the glass roof glistening with rain, the banner of the King Johnson Foundation fluttering in the wind. Bianca's voice narrates softly like a final whisper to the audience. Love doesn't erase our differences. It gives us the courage to face them. And if you've ever been made to feel less, remember, light always finds its way even through the darkest storm. Outside, the rain continues to fall, gentle, endless, alive. But this time, no one is lost in it. The end.